The alarm klaxon screamed through the hangar, drowning out the heavy thrum of the rain on the tin roof. But we weren't going into a storm. We were going into an oven. My name is Jax, and for 10 years I've been a smokejumper. We are the crazy ones who parachute out of planes into the middle of forest fires to cut lines and stop the spread. I thought I had seen every kind of fire nature could throw at us. I thought I knew what heat felt like. I was wrong. The air in the hangar tasted of ozone and jet fuel, a mix that usually pumped me up, but tonight it made me nauseous. My hands were shaking as I buckled my chute, a tremor I couldn't control. "Listen up," yelled Captain Thorne, our squad leader. He was a mountain of a man, with skin like old leather and eyes that had seen too much death. He stood by the open bay door, silhouetted against the gray sky. "We have a code red in the Bitterroot National Forest. A lightning strike started a blaze that has consumed 5,000 acres in 6 hours. That's impossible speed, boys. The wind isn't even blowing." We geared up in silence. My best friend, Benny, looked pale. He was the rookie, the probie, barely 22. He checked his parachute harness 3 times, his fingers fumbling with the clips. "You good, kid?" I asked, slapping his shoulder to snap him out of it. "Something feels off, Jax," Benny whispered, looking at the digital map on the wall. "The fire, it's moving in a circle. Fires don't move in circles. It's like it's hurting something." I looked at the map. He was right. The red zone on the screen looked like a closing fist, tightening around a specific valley. "Don't overthink it," I said, though a cold shiver went down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty hangar. "We jump, we cut the line, we get out. Easy money. Just stick to the protocol." The flight over the drop zone was turbulent. The plane shook violently as we hit the thermals rising from the massive inferno below. I looked out the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. The world was gone. It was just a sea of orange and black, a swirling vortex of destruction. The smoke wasn't the usual gray puff of burning pine. It was thick, oily, and black, choking out the sun like ink spilled in water. It looked like the throat of a volcano opening up to swallow us whole. The heat radiating from below was palpable, even at 10,000 feet. "Green light! Go! Go! Go!" the jumpmaster screamed, his voice barely audible over the roaring engines. I threw myself out the door. The heat hit me instantly, like a physical hammer to the chest. It sucked the air right out of my lungs, leaving me gasping in the free fall. I pulled my chute, jerking upward as the canopy opened with a loud thwack. Below me, the forest was a nightmare. Trees were exploding from the sap, boiling inside them, sounding like artillery fire. I steered toward the landing zone, a small ridge of black rock that wasn't burning yet. I hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact, ash flying up into my mask. I unclipped my chute and looked around. The silence was the first thing that scared me. Usually, a fire roars. It sounds like a freight train barreling down the tracks. But down here, in the black zone, where the trees were already burnt skeletons, it was quiet. Too quiet. Just the soft, sinister crackle of dying embers. It felt like walking through a graveyard. "Sound off!" Thorne's voice crackled in my earpiece, cutting through the static. "Jax is clear," I said, checking my Pulaski axe. "Kruger is clear," said our heavy equipment guy, his voice gruff. Benny is clear. But guys, I found something. You need to see this." We rallied at Benny's position. He was standing near a cluster of pine trees that had miraculously survived the initial wave of flames. In the center of the trees was a campsite. It belonged to civilians, campers who had likely ignored the evacuation warnings to get a better look at nature. "Are they?" I started to ask, but the smell hit me before I finished. It wasn't the smell of burnt flesh or wood smoke. It was the sharp, metallic tang of copper, fresh blood. It cut through the smoky air, triggering a gag reflex I had to fight down. We walked into the camp, weapons, our axes and shovels held ready. The tents weren't melted by the heat. They were shredded. Long, jagged tears through the heavy canvas as if it were wet tissue paper. Sleeping bags were tossed around, torn open, feathers drifting in the hot breeze like snow. "Bear?" Kruger asked, gripping his Pulaski axe. Kruger was a cynic, a massive man who didn't believe in anything he couldn't hit or drink. He looked nervous for the first time I could remember. "Something don't make sense, Jax," he whispered, guys next to me in the dark. "I knew I shouldn't be here." "No bear does this," Thorne said, kneeling by a tent. He held up a piece of fabric stained dark red. "Look at the height of the slash. It starts at 7 feet and goes down. A bear swipes sideways. Whatever did this swiped down with precision." I looked at the ground. The ash was thick, covering everything like gray snow. But in the center of the camp, the ash was disturbed. There were drag marks, massive ones, leading away from the safety of the clearing and deeper into the burning woods. "They were taken," Benny whispered, his voice trembling. "They weren't killed by the fire. They were dragged out alive." "We have a job to do," Thorne said, his voice hard, trying to re-establish command over the fear creeping into the squad. "We cut the fire line at the ridge. If there are survivors, search and rescue will find them. We are here to save the forest." It was a lie, and we all knew it. We weren't just firefighters anymore. We were investigating a crime scene in the middle of hell. But we followed orders, because that's what keeps you alive. We marched toward the ridge, our yellow Nomex shirts bright targets against the blackened world. The heat was rising, pressing against our skin. My boots felt like they were melting with every step, the rubber soles soft on the superheated earth. The smoke swirled around us, creating ghostly shapes that danced in our peripheral vision, teasing our minds. "Did you hear that?" Kruger stopped, turning his head sharply. "Hear what?" I asked, wiping sweat and soot from my stinging eyes. "Clicking," Kruger said, "like rocks banging together or teeth snapping." We stopped and listened, straining against the roar of our own blood in our ears. Click, click, click. It was coming from the smoke ahead. It sounded rhythmic, intelligent. It wasn't the random popping of burning wood. It was a signal, a communication code. "Radio check," Thorne whispered. Static. Our radios were dead. A harsh, white noise filled the channel. The interference from the fire, or something else generating a massive electromagnetic field, had cut us off from the plane. We were alone in the inferno, and something was clicking at us from the dark. The wind shifted violently. A gust of hot air blew the thick curtain of smoke away for a brief second, revealing the jagged ridge ahead of us. And that's when I saw them. At first, I thought they were burnt tree stumps, charred remnants of the forest. They were perfectly still, blending in seamlessly with the charred landscape. But then one of the stumps blinked. 2 glowing blue eyes opened in the darkness, piercing the gloom like lasers. "Contact front!" I yelled, raising my axe, my heart hammering against my ribs. The shapes moved. They didn't run on 4 legs like wolves or bears. They unfurled, standing up on 2 massive, powerful legs. They were covered in ash and soot, their fur matted into hard gray armor that looked like rock brought to terrible life. There were 3 of them. They stood 7 feet tall, their chests heaving with breath that steamed in the hot air. They didn't look afraid of the fire surrounding them. They looked like they owned it, like they were born from it. "What in God's name?" Benny whimpered, stepping back. The one in the center, the alpha, threw its head back. It didn't howl. It made a sound like a cracking whip, a sharp, terrifying crack that echoed off the rocks and shattered our nerves. Then, The fire behind them roared to life again, surging upward as if answering the command.
"Fall back!" Thorn screamed, his composure finally cracking. "To the river! Move!" We turned and ran, boots sliding on the ash. But the fire had changed. It wasn't moving with the wind anymore. It was moving against it. A wall of orange flame erupted to our left, cutting off our escape path. "They're hurting us," I realized, screaming over the roar of the blaze. "They're using the fire to trap us. They're steering it." It was impossible, a violation of physics, but I was watching it happen. The creatures were running along the edges of the flames, kicking burning logs into the dry brush to steer the inferno. They were pyrophiles. They had weaponized the very element we were sent to fight. They understood wind, fuel, and terrain better than we did. We scrambled up a rocky incline, our boots slipping on the loose shale, trying to get above the heat. Below us, the fire closed the loop. The black zone was shrinking rapidly. We were in a kill box, and the walls were made of fire. "Kruger, the chainsaw!" Thorn ordered, pointing to a gap. "Cut that deadfall! Make a bridge!" Kruger fired up his massive chainsaw. The engine roared to life, a mechanical challenge to the beasts. He attacked a massive fallen pine tree that bridged a gap over a ravine. "Hurry!" Benny yelled, pointing back into the smoke. Through the haze, the ash wolves were coming. They moved silently, their gray paws making no sound on the ash. They were fast, low to the ground, hunting with a terrifying coordination that spoke of a hive mind. Kruger cut through the log, wood chips flying, and it fell across the ravine with a heavy crash. "Go! Single file!" Thorn commanded, ushering us forward. Benny went first, scrambling across the bark on his hands and knees. I went next, balancing precariously. The heat coming up from the ravine was intense. The bottom was already burning, a pit of coals. I made it to the other side and turned to help Thorn. Kruger was last. He was backing up, swinging his chainsaw in wide arcs to keep the creatures at bay. "Come on, Kruger! Leave it!" I yelled, reaching out my hand. Kruger turned to run, planting his foot to jump. That's when the alpha struck. It leapt through a wall of fire, actually jumped through the flames, its fur singed but its skin unburnt. It tackled Kruger mid-air, intercepting him like a missile. They hit the ground on the wrong side of the ravine with a bone-jarring thud. Kruger screamed, revving the chainsaw in panic. The blade bit into the creature's shoulder, spraying black, viscous blood. The beast roared, a sound of pure rage, and swiped its massive claws. The blow took Kruger's head almost clean off. The chainsaw fell silent, sputtering out. The alpha stood over Kruger's twitching body, staring at us across the ravine. It smiled. Its teeth were black, stained with soot and blood. It picked up Kruger's body effortlessly and tossed it into the fire below like trash. We ran until our lungs burned like acid and our legs felt like lead. We collapsed in a small cave system near the top of the mountain. We were safe from the fire for a moment, but the psychological terror was just beginning. "We lost Kruger," Benny sobbed, curled into a ball in the dirt. "We lost him. I saw it. I saw—" "Quiet," Thorn hissed, pressing a dirty bandage to a burn on his arm. They can hear us. Keep it down." We sat in the darkness, listening, terrified to breathe. Outside, the fire crackled and popped. "Jax." I froze. It was Kruger's voice. It was coming from just outside the cave entrance. "Jax, help me. It burns." My heart stopped. Hope flared in my chest. "He's alive," I whispered, starting to stand up. Thorn grabbed my vest and yanked me down hard. "He is dead, Jax. I saw his head separate from his body. That isn't him." "Jax, please, don't leave me." The voice was perfect. It had Kruger's rough, gravelly tone, the specific cadence of his speech. Then the voice glitched. It repeated, "It burns, it burns, it burns," faster and faster, until it dissolved into a chattering, high-pitched laugh that sounded like a hyena inhaling helium. They weren't just hunters. They were mimics. They were recording our screams and playing them back to lure us out. "What are they?" Benny whispered, his eyes wide in the gloom of the cave, reflecting the flickering orange light from outside. "I don't know," Thorne said grimly, "but they adapt. Did you see their fur? It looked like charcoal. And their eyes, they have a nictitating membrane, a second eyelid that slides across. That's why the smoke doesn't blind them. They evolved for this." I realized Thorne was right. They were perfectly designed for the inferno. "They are the Ash Pack," I said, the name forming in my mind. "They don't just live in the fire. They are the fire. They feed on the chaos." I checked my gear. I had my Pulaski axe, a fair gun with 2 shots, and a fire shelter, a foil tent meant to protect me from burnover. It was useless against claws that could shear through bone. We were woefully underprepared for a war with monsters. "We can't stay here," Thorne said, looking at the smoke drifting along the cave ceiling. "The fire will consume the oxygen in this cave eventually. We will suffocate before they even touch us. We have to make for the river. It's the only place the fire can't reach." "The ravine is blocked," I said. "We go over the top." Thorne pointed to a narrow chimney in the rock. "We climb. We take the high ground." We shimmied up the narrow rock chimney, bracing our backs against the stone. The stone was hot to the touch, burning our gloves, radiating the heat from the fire outside. The smoke was rising with us, stinging our eyes, making every breath a struggle. We popped out onto a high plateau, gasping for fresh air that wasn't there. The view was apocalyptic. The entire forest was a sea of orange flames. We were on an island of bare rock in an ocean of fire. And they were waiting for us. Surrounding the plateau, sitting on their haunches like gargoyles, were 5 of them. They weren't attacking. They were watching. "They knew," Benny said, his voice cracking with despair. "They knew we would come up here. They herded us to the slaughterhouse." The alpha stepped forward. It was huge, bigger than the others, with a massive scar running down its chest where Kruger's chainsaw had hit it. The wound wasn't bleeding anymore. It had cauterized instantly in the heat, leaving a jagged black line. It looked at Thorne. It pointed a clawed finger at him, a human gesture. It recognized rank. It knew who was in charge. "I think it wants a duel," I said, terrified. "It's challenging the leader. It's tribal." Thorne unclipped his axe, weighing it in his hand. He looked at me, his eyes sad but determined. "Jax, get the kid to the river. I'll buy you time. Don't look back." "No, Captain," I yelled, stepping forward. "We fight together." "That's an order," Thorne barked, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Go, save the rookie." Thorne stepped forward, swinging his axe in a wide arc. "Come on, you ugly bastard. Let's dance. You want me? Come get me." The alpha roared and charged, a blur of gray fur and teeth. I grabbed Benny and sprinted toward the far edge of the plateau. Behind us, I heard the clash of metal on bone, the grunt of impact. I heard Thorne screaming, not in pain, but a warrior's cry of defiance. We reached the edge. It was a 50-foot drop into the river below. The water was white and churning, swollen with debris. "I have to jump," I yelled over the roar of the fire. "I can't." Benny froze, looking down at the jagged rocks. "I'll die." I didn't argue. I grabbed him by his harness and shoved him off the ledge. He screamed as he fell. I turned back for 1 second. Thorne was on his knees. The alpha had caught the axe handle in its mouth and snapped it like a twig. It raised a massive claw, glowing in the firelight. I didn't watch the end. I jumped. I hit the water hard. The cold was a shock to my system, almost stopping my heart instantly. The current was violent, slamming me against rocks, spinning me around. I tumbled underwater, not knowing which way was up, the darkness enveloping me. My head broke the surface, and I gasped for air, coughing up water. "Benny!" I screamed, scanning the churning white water. "Here!" A hand grabbed my vest. Benny was clinging to a log caught in an eddy near the bank. He was shivering violently. We pulled ourselves onto the muddy bank, collapsing in the silt. We were alive. But we weren't safe. The river was wide, maybe 100 feet across. On the other bank, the forest was untouched green, a sanctuary. If we could get across, we might have a chance. But the creatures were already on the cliff above us, looking down. They didn't jump. They didn't like the water. They paced back and forth, howling in frustration, kicking rocks down at us. "They can't swim," Benny laughed hysterically, pointing a shaking finger. "The fire dogs can't swim. We beat them." "Don't get cocky," I warned, watching their eyes. "Look upstream." I pointed. A massive fallen tree spanned the river, creating a natural bridge about 50 yards away. The Alpha was already running toward it, moving with purposeful speed. "We have to cross before they reach the bridge," I said, pulling Benny up. We waded into the deep water. The current was strong. It pulled at our legs, trying to drag us downstream into the rapids. We were halfway across, the water up to our chests, when the first wolf hit the log bridge. It moved with terrifying grace, balancing on the wet bark like a tightrope walker. It didn't even slow down. "Swim!" I yelled. We abandoned wading and started stroking hard. My heavy boots dragged me down like anchors. I had to kick them off, struggling with the laces underwater, letting them sink to the bottom. We reached the far bank and scrambled up into the mud, slipping and clawing our way onto dry land. The Alpha was on the bridge, halfway across. It paused, locking eyes with me. It knew it had us. I stopped. I pulled out my flare gun from my waterproof pouch. "What are you doing?" Benny screamed, tugging my arm. "Run! It's coming!" "I have to stop them," I said, breaking open the barrel to check the load. "Or they'll never stop hunting us. They'll track us forever." I aimed the flare gun. Not at the wolf. Its hide was too thick. A flare would just bounce off. I aimed it at the massive pile of dry wood and debris that had collected at the base of the log bridge on our side. It was a beaver dam of dead wood, dried out by the summer heat, a perfect tinderbox. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. The Alpha snarled, seeing the gun, sensing the trap. It sprinted, closing the distance. I pulled the trigger. Whump. The flare arced through the air, trailing red smoke against the night sky. It hit the drywood pile perfectly, embedding itself deep in the dry brush. The drywood ignited instantly. The fire spread upward, licking at the log bridge, helped by the sap in the wood. The Alpha stopped. It looked at the fire blocking its path. For the first time, I saw fear in its eyes. It wasn't afraid of being burned. It was afraid the bridge collapsing into the water. It hesitated, its claws digging into the bark. That second cost it. The bridge groaned, the wood weakened by the intense, sudden fire. With a loud crack, the log snapped in half. The Alpha fell into the raging river. The beast hit the water with a splash that sent spray flying. It thrashed wildly, its massive claws swiping at the air, trying to find purchase on water. Benny was right. It couldn't swim. Its muscle density was too high, its bones too heavy. It sank like a stone. I watched as the dark shape struggled underwater, bubbles rising to the surface. It looked at me one last time, its glowing blue eyes fading as it was dragged down into the darkness of the river. The hatred in those eyes was chilled, a promise of vengeance even in death. The other wolves on the cliff watched their leader die. They let out a low, mournful sound, a keen that sounded almost human. Then they turned and vanished back into the smoke. They had lost the scent. The water had washed us clean. We were ghosts to them now. We walked for hours through the green forest, bare feet bleeding on the rocks and pine needles. We didn't speak. We couldn't. The trauma had stolen our voices. We just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, moving away from the orange glow in the sky behind us. By dawn, we reached a logging road. A truck found us an hour later. The driver, a burly logger, stopped and looked at us like we were ghosts. We were covered in soot, wet, bleeding, and staring 1,000 yards into the distance. "You boys look like you've been through hell," the driver said, handing us a thermos of coffee. "You have no idea," I muttered, the hot coffee burning my cracked lips. "Hell is colder than I thought." They flew us to a military base, not a civilian hospital. That was the first sign that something was wrong. We were separated immediately. Men in suits were waiting for us. They didn't wear uniforms. They wore earpieces and cold expressions. I sat in a white room for 3 days. No windows, no clock, just a table and a mirror I knew was two-way. Finally, a man came in. He didn't introduce himself. He just placed a file on the table. "You experienced a traumatic event. Smoke inhalation causes hallucinations. Hypoxia affects the brain. You saw bears, confused burnt bears." "Bears don't work on 2 legs," I said tiredly, leaning my head on the table. "Bears don't mimic my captain's voice. Bears don't build traps." The man sighed as if he was disappointed in me. "The official report says your squad was trapped by a sudden wind shift. Captain Thorne and Kruger died heroes. You and Benny survived by luck. Do not tarnish their memory with crazy stories." "Why?" I asked. "Why lie? Why protect the monsters?" "Because people need to believe the forest is safe. They need to believe the only thing dangerous out there is the fire. Panic is expensive." I signed the papers. I took the medical discharge. I just wanted to go home and try to forget the sound of Thorne screaming. But before I left, I saw the map on the wall of the interrogation room. The man had left the door ajar for a second. It was the Bitterroot National Forest. There were red zones marked all over it, not fire zones. They were labeled containment sectors. And then I saw the date on the file on the desk. The operation wasn't labeled wildfire suppression. It was labeled feeding cycle annual. My blood ran cold. The realization hit me harder than the fall from the cliff. I froze in the doorway. The fire hadn't started by lightning. The government had started it. They weren't trying to put the fire out. They were using the fire to feed the ash pack. The wolves needed heat to breed. Or maybe the fire was the only thing that kept them contained in those specific valleys. Or maybe they fed on the energy itself. We weren't sent to cut a line. We were sent because the pack was hungry, and the government needed to give them a snack to keep them happy so they wouldn't come down into the towns. We were the tribute. We were the sacrifice to the old gods of the forest to keep the peace. I met Benny in the parking lot. He looked broken. His skin was gray, his eyes hollow. He was scratching his arm obsessively. "Did you sign?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Yeah," I said. "I signed. We're done, Benny. We survived." "They told me it was a hallucination," Benny said. staring at the pavement. "But Jax, I stole something from the medical bay, before they sedated me." He opened his hand. It was a piece of the alpha's fur. It wasn't just hair. It was metallic. It felt like steel wool or carbon fiber. It shimmered in the sunlight. "This proves it," Benny whispered. "It's not biological or not natural. Someone made them. This is tech mixed with flesh." "Put that away," I hissed, looking around for the suits. "They are watching us. If they see that, we disappear." Benny put the fur in his pocket. He scratched his arm again, hard enough to draw blood. "My arm itches," he said. "It feels like ants are under my skin." I looked at his arm. There was a small cut where he had scraped against the rocks in the cave. The cut wasn't healing red. It was healing gray. The skin around it looked like ash. It was hardening, turning into a patch of scales. "Benny!" I stepped back, horror rising in my throat. "It burns, Jax," he whispered. His voice changed. It dropped an octave. It sounded gravelly, like Kruger. "It burns, and I like it." Benny's eyes watered. Then the pupil dilated. It turned a faint, glowing blue. "Jax, help me," he said. But he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the lighter in my hand that I was using to light a cigarette. He was staring at the flame with a hunger I had never seen before. It was the look of an addict seeing a needle. "Benny, get in the car," I said, panicking, dropping the lighter. "We need a doctor. We need to cut that out of you." "No," Benny said. He smiled. His teeth were turning black. His gums were receding. "I don't need a doctor," he said, his voice echoing with a strange resonance. "I need heat. I'm cold, Jax. I'm so cold." Benny turned and ran. Not toward the hospital, not toward safety. He ran toward the power station at the edge of the base. The high-voltage transformers hummed with massive heat and energy. "Benny, stop!" I yelled, chasing after him. He didn't stop. He moved with that same terrifying loping grace I had seen in the woods. He vaulted the 10-foot chain-link fence like it was nothing. He walked up to the transformer. He touched it. He didn't die. He absorbed it. The electricity arced over him, blue lightning dancing on his skin, and he threw his head back and howled. A crack like a whip echoed through the parking lot, shattering car windows. The MPs came running, rifles raised. They opened fire. Benny didn't fall. He was growing, his clothes ripping as his muscles expanded, his skin hardening into that obsidian armor. The bullets sparked off his hide. He looked at me one last time through the chain-link fence. There was no humanity left in those blue eyes. Only the fire. Only the instinct to hunt. He turned and sprinted back toward the forest, trailing smoke and sparks. He wasn't Benny anymore. The alpha I killed in the river, he was just a soldier, a grunt. Benny was something new. He was a hybrid, a human intelligence with the ash wolf's power. He knew our secrets. He knew our radios. He knew where the towns are.
I'm driving east now. I can't stay in Montana. I can't stay anywhere near the smoke. I look in the rearview mirror and I can see the smoke rising from the mountains. The fire is spreading again. It's not a wildfire. It's an invasion. The government thought they could contain them. They thought they could feed them a few Smokejumpers every year and keep the secret. But they made a mistake. They let one of us become one of them. Benny knows our tactics. He knows our radios. He knows where the towns are. If you see smoke in the woods, don't call the fire department. Run, because the fire isn't burning the trees anymore. It's hunting you, and it has my best friend's face.